The classroom was unusually loud that morning, not because students were misbehaving, but because they were laughing. It started softly at first. A few giggles, a couple of whispers. Then it grew into full, uncontrollable laughter that bounced off the classroom walls. At the center of it all stood Mrs. Daniels, the teacher. She held a single sheet of paper in her hand, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was reading. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't kind, one filled with amusement and disbelief. She cleared her throat and spoke loudly, making sure the entire class could hear. "Class," she said, holding the paper up. "I think we have a future novelist among us." More laughter. Emma sat frozen at her desk in the third row. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes stayed glued to the floor. Mrs. Daniels began reading aloud. "Me father is Chuck Norris," she said, struggling not to laugh. "He teaches discipline, protects people, and believes respect is everything." The teacher paused, then burst out laughing. "Oh my goodness," she said, wiping a tear from her eye. "This is priceless." The room exploded again. Desk shook as students leaned over, pointing, whispering, mocking. Emma's ears burned. Her face felt hot. She wanted to disappear. Daniels continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So let me get this straight," she said. "You expect us to believe your father is that Chuck Norris?" She looked around the room, inviting the laughter. "Kids," she added, "this is why we don't confuse imagination with reality." Emma slowly raised her head. Her voice was barely louder than a breath. "He's coming today," she said. The laughter stopped, just for a second. Mrs. Daniels smiled again. But this time it was worse. "Oh, sweetheart," she replied, gently mocked. "If that were true, I'd be out of a job." She set the paper down, still smiling. What no one in that room noticed, not the laughing students, not the confident teacher, was the quiet knock echoing down the hallway. A knock that would change everything. And when the classroom door finally opened, no one was ready for who was standing on the other side. Career day at Lincoln Middle School was supposed to be simple. Parents would visit classrooms. Students would read short essays about what their parents did for a living. Teachers would smile, clap politely, and move on. That was the plan. But plans have a way of breaking when pride and impatience walk into the room together. Mrs. Daniels had been teaching for over 15 years. She was known for being strict, sharp-tongued, and confident, sometimes too confident. She believed authority came from control, and control came from never being questioned. That morning, she paced the classroom with her clipboard tucked under her arm, heels clicking loudly against the tile floor. She liked that sound. It reminded everyone who was in charge. "All right, everyone," she said, tapping the board. "Today we'll be sharing your essays. Remember, this is a school assignment, not a creative writing contest." A few students chuckled. Emma sat quietly, staring at the folded paper on her desk. She had worked on that essay with care. Every word mattered to her. The night before, she'd read it out loud to her father while he cleaned the kitchen. He had listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. When she finished, he smiled and said, "You told the truth. That's all that matters." Emma believed him. One by one, students stood up and read. "My mom is a nurse. She helps people every day." Polite applause. "My dad works at the factory. He works really hard." More applause. Mrs. Daniels nodded approvingly after each one. Then she reached Emma's name. She didn't call Emma up. Instead, she picked up the paper herself. Emma's heart skipped. Mrs. Daniels adjusted her glasses and began reading silently. At first, her expression was neutral. Then her eyebrow lifted. Then her lips twitched. Then she laughed, not a quiet laugh, not a kind one, a sharp, surprised laugh that made heads turn. "Well," she said, holding the paper up, "this is something." The class leaned forward. Mrs. Daniels cleared her throat and began reading aloud. "My father is Chuck Norris. He believes discipline builds character. He protects people who can't protect themselves. He taught me that respect matters more than fear." She stopped. The room was silent for half a second. Then she laughed again. "Oh dear," she said, shaking her head. "This is what happens when children watch too much television." The class erupted. Emma shrank in her seat. Mrs. Daniels wasn't finished. "Emma," she said, looking directly at her now, "do you understand the difference between fiction and fact?" Emma swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," the teacher replied. "Then you'll understand why this is inappropriate for a serious assignment." Emma's fingers trembled. She spoke quietly. "He really is my dad." That should have ended it. It didn't. Mrs. Daniels sighed dramatically and turned to the class. Class, let this be a lesson, she said. Confidence is good, but lying, especially about famous people, isn't. Some students laughed again. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Emma felt tears pushing behind her eyes. She remembered something else her father had told her. Stay calm. Let people show you who they are. Mrs. Daniels folded the paper and placed it on her desk. Since we're on the topic, she said, does your father plan on joining us today too? Emma nodded. Les. The teacher smiled. Well then, she said, glancing at the clock, I suppose we'll all be very entertained. The bell hadn't rung yet. Career day wasn't over. And down the hallway outside that classroom, a man was walking quietly toward the door. Unaware laughter still filled the room, but it wouldn't last much longer. The laughter didn't stop. It lingered in the air like something sore, sticking to the walls, clinging to Emma's ears no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. Mrs. Daniels turned back to the whiteboard as if nothing had happened. As I was saying, she continued casually, career day is about reality, about achievable goals. Emma stared at the back of the teacher's jacket. Her hands were shaking now. A boy in the back row leaned forward and whispered loudly, maybe her dad can roundhouse kick our homework away. More laughter. Mrs. Daniels didn't stop it. She didn't correct it. She let it happen. In her mind, this was control. Emma felt something break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way confidence slips away when it's embarrassed too many times. She raised her hand. Mrs. Daniels glanced at her, surprised.
Yes,
She said, clearly annoyed. Emma stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't make it up, she said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. My dad taught me not to lie. He said respect starts with truth. Mrs. Daniels folded her arms. And he taught you to use celebrities to impress people? She asked. No, Emma replied. He taught me not to be afraid when people laugh. That got a reaction. A few students stopped smiling. One girl near the window looked down at her desk. Mrs. Daniels stepped closer. Emma, she said sharply, this classroom is not a stage, and I won't allow distractions. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He said he'd come, she whispered. He said today mattered. The teacher scoffed. Well, she said, glancing at the clock again, we've been waiting. She turned to the class. Does anyone else have a famous parent they'd like to introduce? She asked sarcastically. No one raised their hand. The joke had gone far enough, but no one dared to say it. Mrs. Daniels sighed and picked up Emma's essay from her desk. You know, she said, sometimes children create fantasies to feel important. She held the paper up again, and sometimes, she added, adults have to bring them back to earth. Emma's heart dropped. Mrs. Daniels walked toward the trash can beside her desk. Since this essay doesn't meet the assignment criteria, she said calmly, I'm discarding it. Emma shouted before she could stop herself. The room froze. Mrs. Daniels turned slowly. Excuse me, she said. That's mine, Emma said, tears spilling now. My dad read that. He helped me with it. The teacher looked at the paper, then at the trash can, then back at Emma, and smiled. If your father is who you say he is, she replied, I'm sure he won't mind. She dropped the paper into the trash. A few students gasped. Someone whispered, that's messed up. Mrs. Daniels returned to her desk and clapped her hands once. All right, she said. Who's next? Emma sat down, her shoulders shaking. She felt small, invisible, ashamed not because she lied, but because no one believed her. Then it happened. A sound cut through the room, not laughter, not talking, footsteps, slow, steady, heavy, coming from the hallway. Mrs. Daniels paused mid-sentence. The footsteps stopped just outside the classroom door. There was a knock, not loud, not demanding, just confident. Mrs. Daniels frowned. Hold on, she said sharply. The knock came again. The principal's voice followed, tight and uneasy. Mrs. Daniels, may I come in? The room went silent. Every student turned toward the door. Emma wiped her eyes. Her heart began to race, because she recognized those footsteps, and this time she knew. The knock echoed through the classroom, once, then silence. Every student froze in place, half turned in their seats, eyes fixed on the door like it might suddenly burst open. Even the air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Mrs. Daniels frowned. She didn't like interruptions. I said, hold on. She snapped, irritation sharp in her voice. She glanced at the clock again, then at the door, then back at the class. We're in the middle of an assignment. No one spoke. Another knock came. Firmer this time. Come rushed. Mrs. Daniels' jaw tightened. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking loudly, too loudly now, like she was trying to remind everyone she was still in control. She opened it just a crack. "Yes," she said sharply. The principal stood in the hallway, posture stiff, hands clasped in front of him. His face was pale in a way that immediately felt wrong. "Mrs. Daniels," he said quietly, "there's someone here for Emma." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Daniels blinked. "For Emma," she repeated, disbelief creeping into her tone. "Yes," the principal replied. He lowered his voice even more. "He asked to speak with you." Mrs. Daniels straightened her back. "Well," she said coolly, "career day guests are supposed to wait until, I think." The principal interrupted gently. "You'll want to make an exception." That did it. Something flickered across Mrs. Daniels' face. Not fear yet, but uncertainty. She hated that feeling more than anything. She turned back toward the class. "Everyone remain seated," she ordered. "No phones, no talking." As if anyone needed to be told. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She hadn't looked up yet. She was afraid to. Afraid that if she did, she'd be disappointed all over again. But then she heard it, footsteps. Not rushed, not hesitant, measured. Steady, confident. They came closer, stopping just outside the doorway. The principal stepped aside, and a shadow fell across the classroom floor. Mrs. Daniels swallowed. The man at the door didn't speak right away. He stood there, filling the doorway without trying to. There was no dramatic entrance, no announcement, no smile. Just presence, quiet and unshakable. Every student felt it. Conversations died in throats. Smirks faded. Even the kids who had been laughing earlier now sat upright, suddenly aware that something serious had entered the room. Mrs. Daniels forced a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man's eyes moved slowly across the classroom, taking everything in: the desks, the posters on the walls, the students, the teacher. Then his gaze stopped. On Emma. Her head was still bowed, shoulders tense. "Emma," he said gently. Her name cut through the silence like a bell. Emma looked up, her breath caught. "Dad," she whispered. The word hit the room like thunder. A few students gasped. Someone dropped a pencil. Another leaned forward so fast their chair screeched against the floor. Mrs. Daniels' smile faltered. "Sir," she said quickly, "if you're here to observe, I'm here," the man said calmly, "because my daughter was laughed at." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The principal cleared his throat nervously. "Why don't we all take a moment?" he suggested. "And," the man raised one hand. The principal stopped talking immediately. That alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. The man stepped fully inside the classroom now. Students recognized him before they fully understood how. The posture, the eyes, the unmistakable calm. Whispers spread like wildfire.
"No way. Is that?"
"It can't be." Mrs. Daniels felt the room slipping away from her. "Sir," she said again, her voice tighter now. "What exactly is the issue?" The man looked at her. "Really looked? I was told," he said evenly. That truth was treated like a joke in this room. He glanced toward the trash can, and that my daughter's words were thrown away. Emma's chest tightened. The man took one slow step forward. "I think," he continued, "we need to talk." The classroom was silent, because now everyone knew. Whatever was about to happen next. This was no longer a joke, and no one would be laughing again. The man stood quietly at the front of the classroom. No dramatic pose, no raised voice, no anger spilling over, and somehow that made it worse. Mrs. Daniels felt every pair of eyes shift, from her to him, from confidence to confusion, from authority to uncertainty. She tightened her grip on the marker in her hand, then slowly set it down as if it suddenly weighed too much. "I don't understand," she said, forcing a short laugh. "You're Emma's father?" "Yes," the man replied. His voice was calm, steady, unmistakable. A murmur spread through the room. Students leaned forward. Some squinted as if recognition was just a second away. Others already knew, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Mrs. Daniels straightened. "Well," she said, "this is highly inappropriate timing. We're in the middle of a lesson." The man nodded once. "I'm aware." He took a few steps forward, not toward the teacher, but toward Emma's desk. Every movement was deliberate, purposeful. He stopped beside her. "Did you tell the truth?" he asked gently. Emma looked up at him, tears still clinging to her lashes. She nodded. "Yes, sir. That's all I needed to hear," he said. Then he turned. The shift in the room was immediate. Students who had laughed earlier now avoided eye contact. One boy who had made jokes slid lower in his seat. A girl near the window covered her mouth. Mrs. Daniels felt her throat tighten. "Sir," she said again, her voice thinner now. "If this is about an assignment." "It's not," He interrupted quietly. The interruption wasn't rude. It was final. He looked around the classroom. I was told my daughter's essay was laughed at. No response. I was told her honesty was treated like a fantasy. Still silence. And I was told, he continued, that her words were thrown away. His eyes moved slowly, precisely, to the trash can. Mrs. Daniels followed his gaze. The room felt like it was shrinking. I was only trying to teach a lesson, she said quickly. Children need to learn realism. The man nodded. They do. He took a breath. They also need to learn respect. He walked to the trash can, bent down, and reached inside. He pulled out the crumpled essay, smoothed it carefully against his palm, and glanced at it. The sound of paper unfolding felt louder than it should have. Then he held it up. This, he said, is my daughter's voice. The principal shifted uncomfortably near the door. Mrs. Daniels' face had gone pale now. I didn't know who you were, she said. That, he replied, is exactly the problem. A beat. Then realization hit. Not slowly, all at once. A student whispered, that's Chuck Norris. Another gasped. My dad watches his movies. Phones were lifted, then quickly lowered when the principal shot a warning look. Mrs. Daniels staggered back half a step. Chuck Norris, she whispered. He didn't respond to the name. He looked past it. I didn't come here as a celebrity, he said. I came here as a father. He turned back to Emma, knelt so they were eye to eye, and handed her the essay. You spoke your truth, he said softly. Never let anyone shame you for that. Emma nodded, clutching the paper like it was something precious. Then he stood. The room felt smaller somehow, like it couldn't contain what was happening. He faced the class. Every one of you, he said calmly, will someday be judged by someone who doesn't know you. His eyes moved slowly across the students. When that happens, remember how this felt. He turned to Mrs. Daniels one last time. You laughed because you thought there were no consequences, he said. Today, you learned otherwise. No shouting, no threats, just truth, and it hit harder than anything else ever could. The bell rang. No one moved, because everyone knew. Career day was over, but the lesson had just begun. The bell echoed through the hallway, sharp and sudden. Normally it meant freedom, movement, noise, relief. This time no one stirred. Students stayed frozen in their seats, backpacks untouched, eyes darting between the teacher, the principal, and the man standing calmly at the front of the room. Mrs. Daniels broke first. She sank into her chair as if her legs could no longer hold her. The authority she'd worn so confidently that morning now sat in pieces around her. I never meant to hurt her, she said quietly. I was trying to teach responsibility. The principal stepped forward. With respect, he said, this isn't something we can ignore. He looked at Chuck Norris, then back at Mrs. Daniels. There will be an internal review, the principal continued. Effective immediately. You're relieved of classroom duties until further notice. A collective breath rippled through the room. Mrs. Daniels' eyes widened. You can't be serious. The principal didn't waver. I am. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Chuck turned toward Emma. Grab your bag, he said gently. She hesitated, glancing around at her classmates. Some looked ashamed. Others looked inspired. A few looked like they'd just grown up a little. Emma stood and slung her backpack over her shoulder. As they walked toward the door, a small voice spoke up. I'm sorry. It was the boy from the back row, the one who had made the joke earlier. Chuck stopped. He turned, not sharply, not threateningly, but with attention. Apologies matter, he said. The what matters more is what you do after them. The boy nodded quickly. I won't do it again. Good, Chuck replied. Hold yourself to that. They continued toward the door. Before leaving, Chuck paused and looked back at the class. Remember this, he said. Strength isn't about being louder than others. It's about protecting people when they can't protect themselves. The principal nodded solemnly. I'll walk you out, he said. In the hallway, the noise of the school felt distant, muted. Emma clutched her essay. Dad, she said softly, did I do something wrong? Chuck stopped walking. He knelt in front of her again. No, he said firmly. You did something brave. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from shame. Back in the classroom, Mrs. Daniels sat alone. The desks looked different now. Smaller, emptier. For the first time in years, she replayed the moment in her head, not from her point of view, but from a child's. The laughter, the dismissal, the power she'd abused without noticing. The door closed behind the principal. And with it, something else closed too, her certainty. Outside, Chuck and Emma stepped into the sunlight. Want to get ice cream? He asked. Emma smiled for the first time that day.
Yes.
As they walked away, whispers followed them down the hall, not mocking, not cruel. Odd, because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply stands up and walks out with dignity. Even the kids who had been laughing earlier now sat upright, suddenly aware that something serious had entered the room. Mrs. Daniels forced a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man's eyes moved slowly across the classroom, taking everything in. The desks, the posters on the walls, the students, the teacher. Then his gaze stopped. On Emma. Her head was still bowed, shoulders tense. "Emma," he said gently. Her name cut through the silence like a bell. Emma looked up, her breath caught. "Dad," she whispered. The word hit the room like thunder. A few students gasped. Someone dropped a pencil. Another leaned forward so fast their chair screeched against the floor. Mrs. Daniels' smile faltered. "Sir," she said quickly, "if you're here to observe." "I'm here," the man said calmly, "because my daughter was laughed at." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The principal cleared his throat nervously. "Why don't we all take a moment?" he suggested, and the man raised one hand. The principal stopped talking immediately. That alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. The man stepped fully inside the classroom now. Students recognized him before they fully understood how. The posture, the eyes, the unmistakable calm. Whispers spread like wildfire. "No way."
Is that? It can't be.
Mrs. Daniels felt the room slipping away from her. "Sir," she said again, her voice tighter now. "What exactly is the issue?" The man looked at her. Really looked. "I was told," he said evenly. That truth was treated like a joke in this room. He glanced toward the trash can, and that my daughter's words were thrown away. Emma's chest tightened. The man took one slow step forward. "I think," he continued, "we need to talk." The classroom was silent, because now everyone knew. Whatever was about to happen next, this was no longer a joke, and no one would be laughing again. The classroom went back to normal the next day. Same desks, same whiteboard, same schedule written neatly in the corner. But nothing felt the same. Students spoke a little softer. They listened a little more. Some of them still thought about what had happened, not as gossip, not as a shocking moment, but as something heavier. Something that stayed with them. A lesson that hadn't been written on the board. Emma returned to school a week later. She wasn't nervous. She walked into the building with her head up, her essay safely tucked inside her backpack. A few classmates smiled at her. One waved. Another quietly said, "That was brave." Emma smiled back. She had learned something important, not just about truth, but about courage. Across the school, teachers were talking too. Not loudly, not defensively, honestly, about how easily authority could turn into arrogance, about how words meant for discipline could become weapons, about how children remembered humiliation far longer than lessons. Mrs. Daniels didn't return to the classroom. No announcement was made, no rumors confirmed, but everyone understood why. Because respect isn't optional when you're in a position of power. It's required. At home, Emma sat at the kitchen table that evening, working on a new assignment. Her father watched quietly from across the room. "Dad," she asked suddenly. "Yes," he replied. "Why didn't you yell?" He smiled. "Because yelling is easy," he said. "Listening takes strength." She thought about that for a moment. "So being strong doesn't mean being scary." "No," he said. "It means being fair." That night, Emma rewrote her essay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She added a final line at the bottom. "My father taught me that real power is quiet." And that was the lesson that traveled far beyond that classroom. Not because it involved a famous name, not because of fear, not because of punishment, but because a child was protected when she needed it most. Because someone stood up without needing applause. Because respect was shown when it would have been easier to laugh. And long after the desks were rearranged, long after career day was forgotten, that lesson remained. Even the kids who had been laughing earlier now sat upright, suddenly aware that something serious had entered the room. Mrs. Daniels forced a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man's eyes moved slowly across the classroom, taking everything in, the desks, the posters on the walls, the students, the teacher. Then his gaze stopped on Emma. Her head was still bowed, shoulders tense. "Emma," he said gently. Her name cut through the silence like a bell. Emma looked up, her breath caught. "Dad," she whispered. The word hit the room like thunder. A few students gasped. Someone dropped a pencil. Another leaned forward so fast their chair screeched against the floor. Mrs. Daniels' smile faltered. "Sir," she said quickly, If you're here to observe, I'm here, the man said calmly, because my daughter was laughed at. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The principal cleared his throat nervously. Why don't we all take a moment? He suggested, and the man raised one hand. The principal stopped talking immediately. That alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. The man stepped fully inside the classroom now. Students recognized him before they fully understood how. The posture, the eyes, the unmistakable calm, whispers spread like wildfire. No way. Is that oh? It can't be. Mrs. Daniels felt the room slipping away from her. Seer, she said again, her voice tighter now. What exactly is the issue? The man looked at her. Really looked. I was told, he said evenly. That truth was treated like a joke in this room. He glanced toward the trash can, and that my daughter's words were thrown away. Emma's chest tightened. The man took one slow step forward. I think, he continued, we need to talk. The classroom was silent, because now everyone knew. Whatever was about to happen next, this was no longer a joke, and no one would be laughing again. Do you think adults have a responsibility to protect a child's dignity, even when they believe the child is wrong? Tell me what you think.